Today's topic is that people die, and we are the generation who is gonna see the most biggest names going down, and it's not gonna be a sweet ride. Now, just today I was discussing with one of my old friends from metal scene that quite a few artists today, that is around metal scene, have actually died already in 2020. Just last week I read a couple of unfortunate deaths when one of the drummers, for example, previous of Death and Cynic fame, died. And today I found that the ex-drummer of 2 Die 4 had passed away, and also one of the ex-bass players, Nile, more like touring artist, had already died. And the list could be going on for quite a while. Now, these are not exactly the most biggest and most memorable names to most of you. Some of you might be totally unaware who I'm talking about, and to be honest, that's quite alright. We are already way past 7 billion people on this planet, so eventually, you know, somebody you know, at least by name, is gonna die, even though if it's not very close to you or personal touch or whatever. My point here today is not to be mourning person, you know, to shed some tears because people die, because eventually every life is gonna end and we just have to accept it. So rather than be so sad about it and mourning about it, I mean, people die and it's always a tragedy when you know somebody meaningful and he or she or that person dies. But the fact is, we are born and we die, and that's the whole story. Don't need to go more philosophical about it, but if you have to, I would suggest you to read some Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher from 1900th century, who wrote some really cool stuff about it. Now, my point here is that we are the generation who is going to see these bands getting older, and eventually everybody will die. Now, we've already seen big stars, you know, those very famous ones, the kind of pioneers who have died. I'm talking about people like Lemmy. I'm talking about people like Ronnie James Dio. And obviously, even these are rather old news. It seems that we are getting these artists who die more and more frequent ways. That is, not so many months ago, Negrophagia, Mastermind, passed away also. And he wasn't even 60 years old, so we're talking about relatively young people. People way before their so-called best before date, way before they are supposed to go to retirement homes or whatever plans they might have for when their kind of a day job is over and all that stuff. Now, we obviously still see people like Ozzy and rest of the Black Sabbath guys, you know, being there, somewhat relevant, I guess. We still have bands like Iron Maiden and Metallica touring and so forth, but we already can pretty much feel this, say, kind of a takeover happening. And by takeover, I mean the kind of a new generation taking over. This is actually what happened recently. I don't know how it was in different countries, but for example, in Finland, when the Five Finger Death Punch, sorry, it just brings a little bit vomit in my mouth when even I mention the name, was touring with Megadeth. And now we know Megadeth is one of those big four of trash names. And if you're totally clueless what that is, it's Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, Anthrax. So one of those big four names that are one of the kind of a pinnacle bands, especially when we're talking about 80s American metal. And even with this thrash metal, you really can't go bigger than those four, I guess. Now, Megadeth wasn't exactly headlining the tour, more like co-headlining. In essence, that meant that Megadeth was playing before Five Finger Death Punch. Which then again sounds a little bit weird. I mean, after all, Megadeth is like some 20 years younger, roughly, than Five Finger Death Punch. And obviously, Five Finger Death Punch is doing that record selling, you know, in a big amounts, way bigger than Megadeth nowadays, and if we look at the social media numbers and whatever. My point here is, the new generation is taking over, and the older ones are kind of like, could you please, old gentlemen, go to that way? You are way past your due time. Now, not only that people are getting older and still being relevant, but it seems like they are kind of being pushed away in the terms of like younger bands come and these older fellas are supposed to quit unless that is they die before that actually happens. And as such, we, the current generation here, I'm talking about roughly people between 20 and 50 now, it is this generation, both millennials and the Generation X or whatever, we are kind of a people who get to see, at least most of us, I don't know about me, but most of us will anyway get to see that these old band members are gonna die because of old age, because of illness, because of various topics, be it drug abuse, be it just some cancer or whatever. You already noticed that cancer, for example, unfortunately, have hit people like Behemoth's Nergal, for example, and he's like my age, roughly 40 plus. So it seems like we're gonna see when these older metal stars are gonna start dropping like flies. So that's kind of a saddening thing, if you will. It's just beyond like, hey, people die, just get over it, new people will be born. Yes, that is very true. But also we have to understand that when these people actually die, the whole generation of bands die. It's not only that, you know, bands like Metallica or Iron Maiden cease to exist. It's not just like some Black Sabbath finally stops doing gigs, but it's a whole generation of people who will just call it quits, and that's it. No more records coming from these bands, no more gigs, no more tours, no more autographs for you fans. Nothing will happen. I don't know about Kiss, that might be the thing that actually survives even nuclear war. They just put up new masks for the next generation of players and, okay, do your rock and roll show and get it going. But for the rest of us, it's just we're gonna see this generation takeover happening. The bands of 70s and 80s, they're gonna go Sean Connery first, I guess. That is, stop doing their careers and then they will just die and people will only be, you know, shedding their tears. Oh, I bought this Ride the Lightning back in 1985 or something like that, and now they are here no more. Well, that's gonna be happening. Now the big question is, who is gonna take over? Will it be next generation of big ass, you know, bands, which are not the type of, you know, bands like Volbeat or Five Finger Death Punch or whatever? I mean, will there be a new wave of extreme metal bands or even heavy metal bands that are gonna be there on the mainstream and still, you know, make wonderful albums and stuff like that? Now, many people might think that, okay, there are still bands which are big and which are not nearly that old. People would be mentioning bands like, say, Cannibal Corpse or Rammstein or whatever. Doesn't matter what the genre exactly is. But now you have to understand those people are not young either. I mean, for example, when I was having this conversation with my friend, he was something like, did you realize that the Nile guy, Carl Sanders, he is almost 6 years old? It's like, yeah, I mean, they have been playing Nile for more than 25 years now. And it's not like with the first band. So bands that may seem relatively young, you know, they have been only since the 90s. Yeah, but since those bands have been there almost 30 years now, and if those are not the first bands they started, Rammstein is another good example. Lindemann is almost 6 years old as well. So it's not like us guys 40s who are gonna take over. Or maybe it is, but very unlikely. It's more like when these guys who reach the age of, say, 70, the guys who were born, I don't know, early 60s or something like that, they're gonna stop doing their music eventually. Not to mention older people. And then there will be new bands which gonna be the biggest metal band, biggest metal show on earth. But it's not like these dinosaurs of the new generation are gonna be the same. There is no next T-Rex, if you ask me. It's gonna be a whole different thing. So while not this is so much about mourning a loss of single life, as important some individual people might have been, be it Chuck Schuldiner or be it Ronnie James Dio or be it Gordon of Bathory, it's more about losing the whole band. Battery, for example, is a grand example because it was only made possible because of this one person. Now, if we would just, lose one person out of Metallica, I don't know if Kirk Hammett, God forbids, die. Gods forbid. No God. Anyway, Metallica could still be going on. Even more it would be going on if it still was like Hammett, Hetfield, Lars Ulrich. But I don't know, would Metallica be Metallica if you remove James Hetfield out of the context? Would any of these old bands be the same if it was removed? For example, if we remove Ozzy from Ozzy Code, the equation, there is no Ozzy anymore. Somebody might be playing those songs, but then it would feel like cover songs. And the same applies to bands like Judas Priest and whatnot. Now, black metal then again has never been this big, but eventually even the biggest names will get older and start doing something else. And even though some bands are relatively big, say Dimmu Borgir is very, very popular, we can talk about mainstream level of popularity here, it still is very likely that there are no next level bands in black metal, for example, which are gonna be that big. Not to mention death metal. Now, some people are just fine and happy about it, but it is what it is. I mean, people gonna die, and then these bands are gonna die. So it's gonna be interesting how it goes. And even more so, like I said, it's gonna be the loss of these bands. The whole generation of bands going, like, gone. For good. Like, new bands have to be making their way, but it's not gonna be the same. So, my point here is kinda that it's way more than losing just one particular artist, or artist in the making, as it is losing a whole band or a whole bunch of bands, especially when it comes to those artists who have created many, many bands. Stephen Harris of Iron Maiden just said in an interview that he's very much like energetic with his other band, British Lion. And it might be going for years. But when he dies, I mean, it's not that Iron Maiden only dies, it's also British Lion that dies. And who knows, whatever so-called side project which you might have in your, I don't know, desktop drawer. Who knows how many songs and riffs and lyrics ideas are lost just because one individual died. So once again, it's kind of like to prove my point. Go to those gigs, those tours, and buy those albums while they are still available. Well, albums gonna be still going, obviously, but seeing those gigs and shows, it's something that might just stop one day. Like this basketball star Kobe Bryant just died in a helicopter accident with his daughter, which is kind of horrible. I don't even follow basketball, but I mean, imagine if this happened to your favorite artist. Imagine if Iron Maiden's airplane just crashed suddenly when they were just like moving from one country to another. It would be the whole band gone for good. Nothing would have been happening anymore in the Iron Maiden camp. What a disaster it would be to the whole metal community, to the fan base, to the music culture of the world. So instead of focusing on the negativity or negative points in general, focus on the good ones. Buy albums, be it digital or physical, I don't care, and go to see those shows. Go to see those bands before they're gone. That's it. Have a great day. Don't be so sad about death. Enjoy life. Take care.